The much requested cliff house is what we're going to be trying to make today. Your house will not look like this. The technique I'm going to teach you is very different to how I normally go about these things, but by the end of it, we should all have a very unique house. The first thing to do is find the cliff that you want to make your house on. So I've found myself a nice little bay area with this very dominating cliff, and this is what we're going to be making our house on. Now, the format, like I said, is going to be a bit different. So instead of just diving into making the house straight away, what I want to do is actually teach you how to make the individual parts that we're going to put together on top of this mountain so that you have complete context on how to make it before we even go through the very speedy time lapse. So we're going to quickly make a quick frame and you'll see how this is all going to play out. So you see that we've made some pillars up in the air, but let's head over to the flat room and make these individual parts so that you're able to very easily follow the rest of this tutorial. So these are the blocks that we're going to need for this build, and there may be a few extra that I've missed there. So there are two ways to go about these individual parts, one called the 3 and one called the 5. When we made this is how we referred to the different segments. So the first one I want to show you is just a 3. We have 2 pillars of log with 3 blocks apart so that there's a 1 block center in the middle. We then take some spruce stairs and place them on the front of our pillars and the outer sides of each of the left and the right hand ones. We then continue making our pillars by doubling up on top of those spruce staircases. There's no particular number in the Y coordinate that you need to raise it up to, but you do need to make sure that it goes pretty high up. When you're adding this on your mountain, you need to work with the terrain, which is what we'll show when we go back to the time lapse. This is just to show you the general structure of each segment of the build, and this will make sense when we go back to the time lapse and you'll see how this all fits together in one big puzzle. So you can see that I'm bulking up the framework even more than I have done, making sure that I've got that lower framework available. To fill in the wall and give you a little more context, we take stone brick and just fill in that area behind the bottom framework. This is to make it look like it's got a big foundation. Obviously there is no space for interior, there is 1 block, so you may just want to fill it in entirely if you want to. This is to make the exterior look nice. This entire build, in fact, is mainly dominated by the exterior. You won't find much work for interior, you may have to dig inside the mountain. On the top side, we're filling in the walls with a choice of dark green clay. However, if green doesn't take your fancy, go for any color you want. You know that I love to make these builds as flexible as possible. So once you've finished placing all of the wall back, it's then time to start with the roof. From the outer pillar, make sure that you bring in an overhang so that it's in front of your very forward framework. It's very important that this happens, otherwise the 3D element of this build doesn't work. If they all are in line, it won't look quite as good. So we're just going up with a normal staircase block sequence to make sure that we meet in the middle in that very important 1 block center. So it should look something like that, and then we can fill in that gap behind the staircases with some log, making sure that they are all facing in the same vertical direction. Once you've done that, you can then fill in that little gap left with the wall, and you'll see that there is a little bit of space for some interior in those rooms, albeit quite small still, as it's only 3 blocks wide in the top segments. So now we can go and fill in the roof, because we're not going to be filling it in with staircases, we're actually going to be using some stained clay that we're going to detail a bit more on texture, and I'll go over why we texture these blocks a bit later. So we just place them in stacks of 2 that go inwards, and they match the framework at the front. That's probably the easiest way to do it, is just to match the framework that you've got, and that it will overlap on that staircase a little bit, but not to worry. You finish both sides and it should look a little something like this. It will look fairly plain. What we've got now is just our base framework, and we've filled in the walls, but this is what we're going to be working with. This is the bread and butter of the build. So now we're going to go and texture the bottom. By using some acacia wood and some cracked stone bricks, we can make this just simply look a little more interesting to look at. While it's a bit annoying getting all the extra resources for texturing like this, the effect is really nice and I do recommend doing it. On the front, we're then going to go ahead and do some detailing. I like to keep detailing flexible for you, but this is how me and Pearl went about it in this project, adding some buttons, some trapdoors, and on the front some staircases, and we just mirrored this design over and over again for each bit of the puzzle. So we added some stained clay with some slabs on the top. It's a bit of a different design, and it all tied together with any spaces being filled in with some details. However, this is all flexible. You guys should know how to detail pretty effectively, so you can go for whatever you want. We also altered the shape of the roof a bit with just the overhang, just to kind of tie in the shape towards the rest of the build. It's entirely up to you what you do here, but we are essentially finished. I added a few fences just to tie in the build, but the front is done. We just need to make some amendments to the roof, which, as you can see, is still looking kind of plain. We can shape it up a little bit by adding an extra layer on the right hand side and curve it upwards. This just gives the roof an extra bit of shape. By mixing in some dark oak, we can really improve the texture, much like we did to the foundation of this build. All of these little details really add up in the long run and help define the style of this build. It can look a little bit plain because of the design if you don't add all of these details, which may seem to you like a bit of overkill, but again, it is up to you how you want to tackle this project. Essentially though, this is the 3 version of our puzzle pieces, so we're going to be making lots of these together to make up our entire build. There will be connecting portions, there may be balconies, but for the most part it'll be made up of this one and the 5 version, which is essentially a 2-block version bigger. You can even stretch it to 7, but I don't recommend that, as it does make it so wide that the roof is going to be incredibly tall. So the 5 version is on the right and the 3 is on the left. You can see that the 5 has a different style of detailing, but that's fine. These work together, they're essentially the same. So let's head back to the time-lapse now, where we can start putting together the framework now that you understand how to make the individual components. It was really important to make sure you had context here, because this is really hard to explain. Try not to overthink this build, try and put together as much framework as you can. We're going to be planning this out first, and you will see even really late into the time-lapse we will be making amendments, and I want to stress that you shouldn't be afraid of making changes. You can see that we started adding a balcony and then instantly removed it because it didn't look quite right. Most of what you see will probably change, but one thing is certain: you'll see that the build is layered. We have those individual components which you just learned how to make, structured throughout the mountain. They are at different Y coordinates. So we've got a kind of base that we're working towards. We're now going to make a semicircle balcony, which is something that you didn't learn how to make in the individual component thing. These sorts of components are to tie the build together. Each puzzle piece kind of stands on its own on the mountain, and the bits like that balcony there just connect them up, and they become an essential part of the entire design of the build. Hopefully this will make sense when we start filling in the walls. As for now, hopefully you can see where we're going simply through the framework, and I really recommend that you work with a framework first, because like I said, you probably will want to make a lot of changes. We decided that our dominating feature in the middle there was too far forward and too low down, so we used World Edit to move it back and move it up. I do understand that if you're in survival mode, that could end up being very timely, so you need to sort of plan ahead, maybe even on a piece of paper, draw what sort of shape you want to go for. We made absolutely loads of amendments, which is why I decided to teach you how to make the individual components. So you can see we've got a bunch of the 3 design and a couple of the 5 design. The 5 design makes up the bulk of the main build, so there's one on the left and one on the centerpiece. Those are the 5s, the rest of them are 3s. And you can see that the framework's starting to come together now, and it will look a lot nicer when we've filled in all the walls. It will really start to feel like a complete build. This tutorial is very complex to explain because it requires you to use a bit of foresight and vision rather than copy this block for block. I wanted to teach you the puzzle pieces and allow you to place them on the mountain as you see fit. I don't want anyone's cliff house to look exactly like this. Yours should match the terrain of your build, so you will need to experiment a lot to make sure that you get the right shape. And hopefully, after the end of this, I will have explained how balancing works. At the moment, all of the house balances itself out. So we've got different Y levels of build, and the left counterbalances the right. Once we've finished, hopefully I can point out what I mean. At the back here, we're just adding the little extras. These use the same style, but they're not exactly the same as the original. These help tie in any blank spaces that you may get from your original shape. So we can see that the build is really starting to come together with all the walls filled in and the roofs set in place. We've obviously got a lot of detailing to do now. The balcony is one of the feature parts of it, so hopefully you can include something like that in yours. This is also something we didn't include. On the 5 front, we added a 3 front balcony that extends out of it. It just makes it look a bit more detailed and it helps push the build forward. If you want to tackle something like that, go for it. Absolutely experiment with the different parts of the puzzle and try and, like I said, balance it out. We added a pergola here with another just tiny little bit of extra to fill in that right angle that felt like it needed a bit of space. You need to try and balance the roofs that go vertically and the roofs that face forward. On the balcony, we detailed by adding a nice fence to it, spruce to match the rest of the colour, and mimicked the button and trapdoor detailing. Adding a couple of pressure plates on the top just takes away that log texture, and most importantly, this balcony needs to not just be free hanging. It's always nice to make it look like it's supported and that it's not got that straight edge, so we added some fences for a bit of detailing. The fences are great to fill in any spaces that haven't got enough for some quote proper detailing. So as I showed you when we designed the puzzle piece at the start, this will use exactly the same technique, but because they're all different heights, and you'll see, as I said earlier, we make some amendments on this by shifting them up a block or shifting them down a block, but you can see that the detailing works no matter what sort of scale we're working at. It's completely flexible. Although we use this specific design for the windows, by all means come up with your own design, do a cross window, do something different with the spruce staircases and the half slabs. We just use this, and what's important is making sure that it's consistent. You'll see that that detail on the bottom of the window ledge has always stayed the same, and we've always used the buttons and the trap doors. Whatever details you end up going for, just try and remain consistent with them. You'll see on the frame overhangs of the roof, we added some slabs to curve it out and accentuate the build shape. We added a door, and on the balcony, added some long grass on top of these to make it look a bit more overgrown. Because this is on the mountainside, it's exposed to the elements, nature can kind of take over. We added a big chimney directly in the center, making sure that it's tall enough to be seen from the floor. When you're building in creative, you're obviously flying around a lot. You need to make sure that from the ground, things look consistent as they do in the air. We need to finish up detailing, and I don't want to go over each face of the building individually because we all know now how to use this style consistently throughout the build. But you can see how even though it's used multiple times on multiple faces of the build, the consistency really ties it in together, and the build is really starting to come together. We've just got to fill in the rest of the details and get the roof ready as well, and we'll be very close to completion. I realise that this goes very fast, but if you use the technique of learning how to make the puzzle piece and then putting them together on top of the mountain, making sure, very importantly, that it's tall. It has to accentuate the fact that it's on a mountain, not be very stubby. Thin and tall will mimic the style of the mountain. So that's a few things to remember. There's in fact a lot of things to remember for this particular build. On the roof, we're doing exactly what we did in the tutorial style, where we mix in the dark oak and give the roof a bit of shape as well, removing those straight vertical edges. And we are indeed finished. I realise that this is very difficult to take in and follow straight away, which is why I want you to really experiment. You can see how I've used this particular mountain to my advantage, having that balcony that extends over the edge of the cliff and this really tall, thin mansion. A huge thank you to Pearlescent Moon today, who not only helped with the design of this, but actually helped me build this, and it did take a long time. It took about 2 hours to build, so I owe her a great deal. Thank you very much, Pearl, and thank you to watching. If you're listening to my voice right now, that means you've made it to the end of the video, and there's only one thing left to say, which is thank you and goodbye.